Hey guys, Shama here. We are with Rohit Bhargava, the author of the latest Non-Obvious. Rohit, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So very excited about your latest book. You know, I'm a big fan. I love all your previous books, Personality
Thank
Not
you.
Included. And you got like Economics, obviously, which was the breakout hit. And so, I'm a big fan. So talk to me about non-obvious. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think anybody who's had to suffer through a presentation that is perfectly obvious will know exactly what that means,
Yeah.
which is we're surrounded by the obvious.
Yes.
And so part of the reason why I wanted to call a book non-obvious is that it really puts a challenge on me to think about the world and share ideas that not everybody's heard before. Mm-hmm. And so part of it is like a promise, like you're going to read something that is not
That
really...
is really not obvious.
Yeah.
Okay, so share with us something that is really not obvious when it comes to problem solving.
Yeah, so problem solving is an interesting one because we spend a lot of time trying to get inspiration, especially in the marketing world. Mm-hmm. We get inspiration from case studies. We're so case study driven. And like it's so funny because I'm sure you've been in this situation where you're sitting across from someone who says, we want to be more innovative, and you bring them an idea, and the first thing they say is, that's an awesome idea. Can you show me an example of someone who's done it before? Yeah. And you're like, well, if it's innovative, nobody's done it before. That's kind of the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think the challenge for us a lot of times is when we think about innovation or thinking different, like there's no blueprint for that. There's no template for that. Mm-hmm. And as soon as we try and put a template into how we think about these things, even from like a timeline point of view, all of a sudden we stick ourselves into a position where we're making it harder for ourselves to innovate or be non-obvious. Yeah. So part of it is like throwing that away and saying, you know what, I'm going to do this completely differently because I'm not starting from the same template. I'm not starting a document by cutting and pasting from the previous one that I had before. I'm starting from nothing.
Scratch,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
That can be daunting for a lot of people.
It is daunting, but you know what? Like what's more daunting, like the way that it's daunting is a blank screen. Mm-hmm. A blank screen to me is more daunting than a blank page. Like a physical page.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times...
the difference for me, like how is that different?
Yeah, so if you've ever had to produce a presentation, there's a temptation to like, okay, I'm just going to jump into PowerPoint or Keynote and start doing my presentation.
Sure, yeah.
And that's the worst way to do a presentation. Like when I teach students at Georgetown how to do like public speaking and putting a story together, I always start with Post-it notes. Post-it notes and Sharpies, which is a screenwriting way of doing it. It's storyboarding.
Sure, yeah.
And so you say, well, what's my first beat, right? Because in screenwriting, you call them beats, scenes. What's my first scene? What's my second scene? What's my third scene? And what it divorces you from is the idea that like, that's my first slide, that's my second slide. Because your first screen might have 6 slides eventually when you put it into a presentation. But the story is what's most important. It's not like, what are those 6 slides going to be?
Yeah.
That's later on. So part of the challenge is like we have to change the way we start thinking about filling that blank screen and instead change it to a blank page.
What else do you think it is that about problem solving that people have that go about it in an obvious way, but there is a non-obvious way to do something?
Yeah, I think that part of it is that we train ourselves, especially in the business environment, to learn from examples that feel close to us. And we're very difficult at seeing how something that feels totally different from us can relate. And so what that means is that we look for case studies in our industry. We look for inspiration from people who we've already heard of. And we don't necessarily gravitate to like the outside or the other side. Yeah. And I think that the challenge is if you're going to creatively solve a problem, then you have to embrace your own creativity in general. And that's really easy to not do because we can just kind of focus on the same stuff over and over again. Yeah. And we have to intentionally break out of that.
Especially when other people are pointing and saying, but wait, here's the obvious way you should do this, right? So it's kind of like marching to the beat of your own drummer, because when I started my company, Marketing Zen, people all said, pick an industry, pick 2 industries, like, a digital agency, it's really hard to do unless you have in-depth industry exposure. But I was like, how else then, are you bringing like new ideas to the table all the time? Because a big part of how we're able to do it is because we see like, this works so well in healthcare, why aren't we applying this here to e-commerce, right? Or like, here's a great idea in retail, why can't this be applied to manufacturing?
Yeah.
And so I feel like that was a non-obvious way to go about building a company, but it's paid off because I feel like the work that we do with our clients gets better results because of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just learning how to ask the right questions of the right person. So I know probably when we're talking about a book, like it's not the best thing to recommend a different book, but
No,
I read a great book called Small Data by Martin Lindstrom, who's a consumer researcher. He spends like more than 300 days a year going into people's homes and asking questions.
Great job.
And and he basically so that but he's on the road all the time,
Sure,
right? But he likes that
no.
lifestyle.
Yeah.
But one of the things he talks about is when he goes to a foreign country, his favorite way of arriving in that country is to get a taxi driver who's from a different place. So if he goes to Germany, he'll find a taxi driver that's from Africa. And he'll interview that person about the culture in Germany because that person has an outsider perspective as an immigrant.
Interesting.
And so he gets that outsider perspective
Yeah.
that really helps him to understand that culture and that country. And I thought like that was such an interesting way of using something we don't often think about, which is the cab ride from the airport to our hotel as an opportunity to learn about especially a totally new and different country if we happen to be traveling internationally.
And what a great non-obvious way to get to understand
and that's the kind of things
culture.
we have to choose to do, right? Because nobody's going to tell you to do that, right? Nobody requires you to do it, and it's probably not part of your job.
Right.
You have to choose to do that.
So I think the idea is the non-obvious is an intentional choice.
Yes.
Yeah. So very cool. Great book, by the way. A big fan of your work. Check it out, guys. Non-obvious, now on Amazon and bookstores, and how to think different, curate ideas, and predict the future. A big promise, but it lives up to it. Thanks so much, Rohit.
Thank you.